They called it madness. A queen who refused to eat alone, because every night she dined with a corpse seated beside her, not a stranger, but someone she once loved more than life itself. That this is no myth. It's the real story of obsession, grief, and a royal secret buried behind locked palace doors. That if you're drawn to the twisted truths of royal history, hit subscribe and stay till the last course is served. The grand dining hall of the palace was draped in velvet silence. Servants moved like shadows, barely breathing. At the far end of the long table sat the queen, her posture regal, her expression unreadable. Across from her, an empty chair. But it wasn't truly empty. Each night, the same setup. A second plate served, goblet filled, and a silver fork placed with ceremonial precision. The guards outside whispered about it. Courtiers dared not ask. But everyone knew someone else sat there in her mind. Someone who no longer breathed. Years ago, that very man had been her heartbeat, her husband, her king. But when sudden illness stole him from her arms, she didn't scream or cry. She simply refused the burial, refused the mourning, refused to let go. Instead, she ordered his body embalmed, not to be laid to rest, but to remain by her side. She had his clothes changed daily, his hair combed, and perfume dabbed beneath his cold ears. That to the outside world, he was gone. But to her, he never left the table. As nights turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the palace began to rot under the weight of her silence. Ministers hesitated to speak in meetings. Servants flinched at her footsteps. Whispers flooded the marble halls. She's lost her mind, some said. She's cursed, said others, but none dared speak to her directly. Not even her closest advisors. Because when she looked at that lifeless face across the table, she didn't see a corpse. She saw a memory still breathing. And anyone who questioned it was dismissed, exiled, or quietly replaced. Every evening, just before the final bell, she entered the dining hall in full royal dress, crown in place, hands gloved, as she would pause at the chair opposite hers, gently touching the lifeless shoulder, and whisper something only the walls could hear. Then, as musicians played soft, melancholic tunes, the meal would begin. She would speak to him, asking how his day had been, laughing softly at imagined responses, raising her glass for toasts that echoed in emptiness. To her, it was love. To her court, it was unbearable. And yet, none dared intervene, because the queen's madness had become part of the kingdom's order. Outside the palace, famine whispered through the fields. The treasury thinned, trade slowed, and foreign envoys returned home uneasy. But inside, she remained blind to the crumbling world. All her decisions now came at dusk, after dinner with the dead. And if a minister brought bad news before the meal, he was never seen again. The council grew silent. No one dared disturb her sacred hour, because they knew, in her eyes, the dead king still ruled, and she was simply his voice. One winter evening, as snow fell like ashes outside the stained glass windows, a young maid accidentally dropped a silver tray near the queen's table. The clang shattered the silence. The queen didn't flinch, but slowly turned her gaze to the wall behind the corpse. There, in a tall mirror, she saw it clearly. Not a beloved king, but a motionless shell slumped in fine velvet. The illusion cracked. Her wine glass trembled. For the first time in years, her hand withdrew from his. But instead of collapsing in grief, she simply stood and ordered the maid to be removed. The dinner continued. But now, something in her had shifted. The next morning, palace guards were summoned to seal off the royal dining hall. Doors were bolted, windows boarded. No explanation, no entreat. The queen announced she would dine elsewhere, alone. But at night, strange sounds still echoed from within that locked room. Soft music, footsteps, laughter, as if the ritual had moved deeper. A hidden door behind the library led to a chamber no one remembered being built. Inside, candlelight flickered across familiar furniture. The same long table, same two plates. The queen had simply relocated the past. Far from curious eyes, closer to the silence she trusted. Not long after retreating into her hidden chamber, the queen began to change. She grew pale, yet refused physicians. Her hands trembled, yet she insisted on pouring his wine herself. As she spoke less to the living and more to the dead. Some claimed she was haunted. Others said she was being punished, But the truth was crueler. She had starved her own soul, feeding only memory each night. She touched a frozen hand, and with each touch, her own warmth seemed to fade slowly. The living queen was becoming part of the ritual herself. An artist was once summoned to paint the queen, her first commission in years, but when he arrived, she gave only one instruction. He must be in it, at the table, just as he is. The painter's brush shook as he studied the embalmed figure seated across from her for hours. She posed beside the corpse, smiling faintly, as if nothing was strange. But before the final strokes were made, the queen suddenly dismissed him. She stared at the half-finished canvas and whispered, "No paint can capture devotion." The portrait was hidden away. No one ever saw it again. And the artist? He never took another royal commission. Rumors of the queen's behavior eventually reached the church. A high-ranking archbishop was sent to counsel her, to remind her of life, duty, and divine balance. He entered the palace with prayers and exited without a word. Witnesses said he came out pale, shaking, muttering, "There's love, and then there's something else." He never returned. The queen, however, seemed calmer after his visit, not saner, just quieter. If she had been affirmed, as if even heaven had stepped back from her grief, she resumed her dinners with greater grace and deeper silence. One spring evening, she gave a single command: "Bring another chair." It was placed beside her own, not across from it. From that night onward, she no longer looked into the past. She sat with it. Two thrones, two figures, one kingdom. She began signing royal decrees under both their names. Hers and his. Coins were minted with both their initials. Some cheered it as symbolic love. Others whispered of possession, but the truth was chilling. The line between ruler and shadow had vanished. The queen was no longer leading alone. She had welcomed the dead into power. One summer afternoon, the palace bells tolled, loud, sudden, without announcement. Courtiers rushed into the halls, expecting news of war or death, but the queen appeared calmly on the balcony, veiled in black lace. "I simply wish to remind you," she said, "that he still hears us." The crowd stood frozen, unsure whether to bow or pray. From that day forward, the bells rang every evening at sunset. Not for the people, not for the heavens, but for him. Even time itself had to bow to her grief. And the kingdom obeyed. Out of fear or love, no one knew anymore. Years passed, and new generations grew up knowing only one kind of queen, the one who dined with the dead. Servants swore they heard two voices behind the chamber walls, one soft, one hollow. Children dared each other to touch the locked door and fled when it echoed with footsteps. Advisors made decisions alone, unsure if their monarch still ruled or if she had already passed into the world she longed for. But no one opened the door, not out of respect, but because deep down, they feared she might not be alone in there anymore. One night, the palace lights dimmed and never rose again. No bells rang. No orders were given. Only silenced. When the chamber was finally opened, years too late, they found a long table set for two. Silver goblets, two plates, and at the head, two thrones. On one sat the mummified king, untouched. On the other, the queen, dressed in her coronation gown, perfectly still, her hand resting gently in his. No signs of struggle, no pain. Just peace. She had dined with death for so long that in the end, it welcomed her like an old friend. They buried them side by side, just as she wished, not in the royal vault, but beneath the very chamber where they dined. Above their tomb, no grand statue was raised, just a single inscription carved in stone: "Loyalty does not rot." The story spread across kingdoms of a queen who chose devotion over reason, memory over power. Some called it madness. Others, love beyond life. But one truth lingered like candles smoke in palace halls. Grief, when left unanswered, becomes its own kingdom. And hers was ruled in silence forever.